What unfolded recently between former President Trump and Representative Ilhan Omar goes far beyond your typical Washington drama. We're witnessing a pivotal turning point that's redefining American political discourse in ways most people haven't fully grasped yet. Let me walk you through what actually happened here, because the surface-level story misses the real significance entirely. For those who weren't paying attention, here's the spark that ignited everything. Omar made a decision that shocked people across the political spectrum. Rather than expressing even minimal compassion, she publicly ridiculed Kirk's passing, sharing mocking content while his loved ones were still processing their loss. His kids were asking about their dad, and she was distributing harsh memes online. I've watched political discourse evolve over decades, but this felt fundamentally different. We weren't talking about disagreements over legislation or partisan conflict. This ventured into morally troubling territory that transcended politics entirely. People from every background, progressives, conservatives, moderates, even those who typically avoid political discussions, experienced the same gut-level revulsion. Certain boundaries shouldn't be violated, and respecting the deceased used to represent one of those sacred lines. Even fierce adversaries once recognized this fundamental aspect of human dignity. The backlash arrived swiftly and intensely. Digital platforms erupted with unified outrage, with countless voices demanding accountability. What distinguished this from standard political feuds was its bipartisan nature. This wasn't ideological tribalism. Americans collectively declared that celebrating someone's death crosses an unacceptable line. Here's where Trump's political instincts truly shined. Most politicians would have released a conventional statement, perhaps requested an apology, then moved forward. Trump recognized something more significant. He understood Omar had inadvertently given him a golden opportunity to reshape the entire conversation around American principles. When Trump weighed in, he didn't simply criticize Omar or rally his base. He executed something far more calculated and impactful. He redirected attention towards Somalia, Omar's birthplace, drawing sharp distinctions between that troubled nation and the United States. He highlighted the widespread poverty, systemic dysfunction, ongoing conflict, and the reality that most Somalis endure hardships unfathomable to average Americans. Then came the devastating question that transformed the entire dynamic. What gives someone from a struggling nation the standing to lecture Americans about governance? Suddenly, the narrative shifted entirely. Omar found herself needing to justify why she possessed moral authority to criticize this country. From a strategic perspective, this maneuver was absolutely brilliant. Trump transformed Omar's insensitivity toward a deceased American into a broader examination of gratitude and allegiance. When Trump casually mentioned during interviews that Somalia's leader rejected taking Omar back, he wasn't merely joking. He was highlighting the irony of someone who received opportunities here, yet consistently attacks the nation that provided them. But Trump's response accomplished something even more profound. He dragged long-standing questions about Omar's background, the marriage allegations, immigration fraud rumors that had circulated for years, directly into mainstream consciousness. The media had largely ignored these controversies, but when the president addresses them on his platform, they become impossible to dismiss. For years, these topics were labeled conspiracy theories. Trump forced them into daylight, where millions could evaluate them independently. Here's something crucial that surprised many Americans. Omar's confident assertion that citizens cannot be deported wasn't entirely accurate. While extremely uncommon, denaturalization exists as a legal mechanism. Citizenship can be revoked for those who committed fraud during their applications, concealed material information, or engaged in serious crimes like terrorism or treason. Those who remember the Cold War era might recognize echoes from that period, when loyalty assessments weren't controversial but expected. There existed an understanding that citizenship involved duties alongside privileges. That collective memory partially explains why Trump's messaging resonated powerfully with older demographics. Omar suddenly couldn't maintain her untouchable status. She was forced into defensive positioning. The visual impact devastated Omar's image. During her CNN appearance with Caitlin Collins, she bore little resemblance to the confident progressive icon her supporters knew. Instead, she appeared anxious, cornered, almost frantic. When Collins questioned her about sharing the Frankenstein comparison, Omar attempted deflection, claiming she needn't endorse everything she shares. The problem? That Frankenstein reference wasn't incidental. It was the entire point of what she posted. Then came the truly revealing moment. Under increased pressure regarding deportation calls, Omar snapped defensively, insisting citizens cannot face deportation. You could detect the nervousness in her voice. She was attempting self-reassurance as much as persuading viewers. When the scrutiny intensified further, she resorted to insults, dismissing critics as foolish. Anyone with political experience knows this pattern. When someone abandons substantive arguments for name-calling, they've already lost. That's precisely what transpired here. Americans possess keen instincts for detecting desperation. Equally telling was the deafening silence from Omar's typical allies. When progressive figures like AOC or Sanders face attacks, you usually witness coordinated support, fundraising campaigns, organized rallies. With Omar, nothing. Democratic colleagues went quiet. Financial backers hesitated. Discussions about primary challengers emerged in progressive circles. That reveals everything about her deteriorating position. When your own party stops defending you and begins treating you as toxic baggage, the walls are closing in. Trump connected character directly to national allegiance with devastating effectiveness. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. While Omar ridiculed the deceased from behind a screen, Trump stood physically present at the memorial service alongside Kirk's family, joined by tens of thousands of mourners. The vice president attended. Major conservative figures participated. The message was unmistakable. This is how you honor the fallen. This is genuine respect. These are authentic American values. Against that backdrop, Omar's cruelty appeared even more reprehensible. Families grieving, leaders demonstrating dignity, Americans uniting in shared loss, and Omar was posting mocking comparisons. The visual disparity alone carried more weight than countless campaign advertisements. The situation worsened. Security confronted an armed individual impersonating law enforcement near the memorial. Consider that reality for a moment. Families attempting to mourn, people paying respects, and someone appears with weapons creating potentially catastrophic danger. That's exactly the chaos that irresponsible rhetoric can unleash. The fundamental lesson here is critical. Language carries real consequences. When leaders prioritize cruelty over compassion, when they mock death rather than showing reverence, they cultivate an environment where anything becomes justifiable. That represents a perilous trajectory for any civilization. What we're actually witnessing are radically different philosophies about America's identity and future direction. Omar embodies one approach: progressive multiculturalism, perpetual critique of America, reimagining national identity through grievance narratives. Her supporters see her as representing the future. Critics see her as epitomizing everything dysfunctional in contemporary politics. Trump represents the alternative: populist nationalism, America first principles, allegiance to country, preserving what made this nation exceptional. Trump doesn't apologize for America. He champions it. He doesn't fixate on failures. He emphasizes achievements and building upon that foundation. For those who lived through defining 20th century struggles, Trump's message likely resonates on deeper levels. You remember when loyalty wasn't performative? It was essential for survival. When national unity wasn't deemed controversial, but necessary. when patriotism wasn't considered extremism, but basic citizenship. Trump's framing resonates because older generations witnessed what happens when nations lose shared identity, when citizens abandon common values, when loyalty becomes optional. That historical perspective provides wisdom younger generations often lack, the ability to recognize danger when you see it. Something receiving insufficient attention in current political climate is the connection between reckless rhetoric and actual violence. We witnessed this horrifyingly at Kirk's memorial with that armed individual. This person wasn't simply carrying weapons. They were impersonating authorities, conducting unauthorized operations among thousands of grieving families. Consider how we arrived at that point. When political figures choose outrage over responsibility, shocking statements over thoughtful discourse, they create atmospheres where anything feels justified. Omar's cruel mockery didn't just wound Kirk's family. It contributed to an environment where some felt violence was appropriate response to political disagreement. This illustrates our politics spiraling dangerously. Outrage generates engagement. Engagement generates revenue. Revenue funds more outrage. Politicians compete for maximum shock value because controversy translates to attention, and attention converts to political capital. Where does this road ultimately lead? We're glimpsing the answer, and it's frightening. The distinction between free speech and responsible speech is something every leader must grasp. Yes, Omar possesses the right to express whatever she wants, however ignorant or cruel. But leaders should understand when not to exercise that right. They should prioritize country over petty scoring, unity over division, decency over politics. This is where Trump demonstrated genuine leadership, something overlooked amid the noise. By standing with Kirk's family, reframing debates around loyalty and decency, reminding Americans of shared values, Trump exemplified what responsible leadership actually requires. It's not about freedom to say anything. It's about wisdom to say the right thing at the right moment. Here's something learned from decades observing human behavior. Character scandals endure far longer than policy controversies. You can survive questionable votes on spending bills, spin controversial positions on regulations. But when the public decides you lack basic human decency, when they see you celebrating death, there's no recovery. Every opponent Omar faces henceforth will reference this. Every debate, campaign advertisement, fundraising appeal, they'll all recall the moment she mocked a dead man while his children grieved. That's not a political liability. That's a career-ending millstone. Trump recognized something even more profound. He saw Omar's cruelty as an opportunity to shift the entire national conversation from "should she apologize" to "should she even remain here?" That's political mastery at the highest level, using your opponent's momentum against them to achieve something far greater than winning an argument by connecting Omar's comments to questions about her immigration history. Trump made millions of Americans suddenly aware of denaturalization, the legal process by which naturalized citizens can lose citizenship if obtained fraudulently. Most people had no idea this possibility existed. Suddenly, it dominated national conversation. Once trust shatters at this fundamental level, it rarely returns. That's exactly Omar's current reality. She transformed from controversial, yet untouchable progressive icon to someone even her own party views as liability. The whispers about primary challenges, silence from allies, donor hesitation, all reveal everything about her political trajectory. But this transcends Omar. It's about where our politics is headed. We're at a crossroads as a nation, and the choice we make determines what country we leave future generations. Do we reward politicians who choose cruelty over decency? Do we normalize mocking death and celebrating division? Or do we demand better from our leaders? Do we insist that power brings responsibility? That representing Americans means embodying American values? This is where older generations have crucial roles. You remember when leaders understood the weight of their words, when public service meant serving something larger than yourself, when loyalty to America wasn't controversial, but essential. You possess historical perspective to recognize what we're losing and moral authority to demand its restoration. The danger isn't merely having politicians like Omar who mock the deceased. It's creating a system where such behavior becomes normalized, where outrage is rewarded over decency, where division proves more profitable than unity. That's a formula for societal breakdown you've witnessed in other nations, the collapse occurring when shared values disappear and common purpose evaporates. Look at what happened during the memorial itself. Tens of thousands of Americans gathered to honor one man's life, comfort his family, demonstrate that decency still matters. President Trump and Vice President Vance attended not from political necessity, but moral obligation. That's the America you remember, isn't it? Where we united during loss, honored our dead regardless of political differences. The contrast with Omar couldn't have been starker. While thousands gathered showing respect, she was home posting cruel memes. While leaders demonstrated American values in practice, she demonstrated what happens when those values are abandoned. The choice between these approaches isn't really about politics, it's about the kind of society we want to be. But there's genuine hope in this story, coming from an unexpected source: the American people themselves. When Omar crossed that line of basic decency, Americans across the political spectrum rejected her behavior. It wasn't partisan tribalism. Democrats, independents, people who usually ignore politics, all said the same thing. This isn't who we are. This isn't what we accept. That gives me tremendous optimism. It tells me that despite all the division and anger, Americans still share fundamental values. We still believe in respecting the dead, comforting the grieving, maintaining basic human decency even during heated political battles. Those values aren't partisan. They're American. The question is whether we'll demand our leaders reflect those values or continue rewarding outrage politics. The choice is ultimately ours. Every vote cast, every candidate supported, every behavior excused or condemned. These are decisions about the country we want to inhabit. Trump's response showed what leadership looks like when guided by principle rather than political calculation. He didn't merely score points against an opponent. He reminded Americans of who we used to be and who we can be again. He stood with the grieving, honored the dead, defended the values that made this country great. Omar's downfall showed what happens when leaders abandon those values, pursuing clicks and controversy. That's a lesson every politician should learn, but more importantly, every voter should remember. This clash between Trump and Omar matters more than people realize. This was a defining moment revealing something important about where we are as a country and where we're headed. It showed Americans still have standards, still expect decency from leaders, still believe some things matter more than political point scoring, but it also showed how fragile those standards can be, how easily they erode when we're not vigilant. The responsibility for protecting those standards lies with all of us. Your generation understands this better than most because you've witnessed what America can accomplish when united behind common values. That experience gives you both wisdom to recognize what we're losing and moral authority to demand we get it back. Leadership isn't about having the loudest voice or most social media followers. It's about values, respect, and responsibility. It's about understanding that words have consequences, actions matter, and representing Americans is a privilege with obligations. It's about showing up when it counts, standing with the grieving, defending what's right even when unpopular. That's what Trump demonstrated. That's what Omar failed to understand. That's what the rest of us need to remember, navigating the challenging times ahead. The future of American politics and society depends on whether we reward responsible leadership or continue down the path of outrage and division. The choice, as always, is ours to make. But we must make it soon, before the damage becomes irreversible. So what do you think? Did Trump fundamentally change the political landscape with this move? Should there be real consequences for Omar's actions? I want to hear your perspective in the comments below. And if this analysis opened your eyes to something you hadn't considered, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with someone who needs to understand what's really at stake for our nation's future.